Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Today is the last day of early voting in Nevada, the third contest for the 2020 Democratic nomination. The state's Democratic Party says more than 26,000 people took part in the first 2 days, on Saturday and Sunday. For comparison, about 84,000 people participated in Nevada's entire caucus in 2016. The Nevada Democratic Party is blaming high turnout for lines stretching as long as 5 hours. One of the latest polls of the state from the progressive think tank Data for Progress shows Bernie Sanders with a 19-point lead. You can see Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and Joe Biden clustered behind him, with Tom Steyer in fifth at 10%. But the poll generating the most news today is a national one. The survey from NPR, PBS, and Marist shows former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg in second at 19%, behind Bernie Sanders and ahead of Joe Biden. That was enough to guarantee Bloomberg a spot on the debate stage tomorrow night in Las Vegas. He'll be joined by the same candidates from the last debate, minus Andrew Yang, who dropped out of the race after the New Hampshire primary. This will be Bloomberg's first debate appearance alongside his 2020 rivals. Bloomberg has spent more than $300 million on campaign advertising, but has yet to participate in a single primary or caucus. Instead, he's been focusing his resources on the 14 states that vote on Super Tuesday. More than 1,300 delegates are at stake on March 3rd. They represent a third of the total delegates available this race. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Aaron Blake, and Maggie Severns join me now. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Aaron is a senior political reporter for The Washington Post, and Maggie is a reporter covering money and politics for Politico. Welcome to you all. Caitlin, it's been more than a decade since Michael Bloomberg participated in a debate. What do we know about how he's preparing, and how should we expect other candidates to prepare for him?
Hi, Elaine. Well, I talked to the campaign, and they say they know that Michael Bloomberg will likely be going into this debate with a big target on his back. We've seen the several candidates that he's going to be competing against, all of his rivals, really on the attack, because this is the first time we'll see Michael Bloomberg on the debate stage in this type of setting. For the entirety of his campaign, which has really only been 3 months, he's been really able to control his own narrative. He's been all over the airwaves with ads that have helped him gain support in this primary, helped him gain so much support to make it to the debate stage tomorrow night. He's also had rallies all over the country focused on those Super Tuesday states, but we haven't yet seen him in this type of combat with these rivals. He's been focused his campaign squarely on President Trump, trying to make this kind of a general election campaign. We haven't really seen him engage many of his rivals yet. That might change tomorrow night as they are expected to go after him. We have seen Bernie Sanders talk a lot about Bloomberg in the past couple of days, saying that Bloomberg can participate in this election, but he cannot buy his way onto the debate stage. A lot of other candidates kind of echoing that sentiment. We're also hearing from Elizabeth Warren, who had a tweet out just a little while ago saying that the debate tomorrow night will give voters curious about how each candidate will take on Donald Trump. We'll get a live demonstration about how we go after an egomaniac billionaire. So that's kind of how these campaigns are planning to take on Bloomberg, and the campaign knows it.
All right. And Caitlin, we should mention to our viewers, you're coming to us obviously from a campaign event there, Senator Sanders' campaign event that is in full swing right now, hence the decibel level behind you. Aaron, let me turn to you. You actually went back and watched Michael Bloomberg's last debate from 2009. What did you learn from that?
Well, it was interesting. You know, this is the last debate that he participated in. Obviously, it's more than a decade ago. This was when he was running for a third term as mayor of New York. There were only 2 debates back then, but I thought it would give us a little bit of an idea about what we might expect on Wednesday night, given this is a guy that we really haven't seen on the national stage so much in recent years. It was interesting that he seemed to have a real command of the facts. He seemed to be very prepared for the debate. He was ahead in the race, yet he was very combative with his opponent, which I think is something that maybe we could see tomorrow. He's obviously somebody who will be on the receiving end of attacks, but maybe he'll also be willing to dish them out as well. But there was also a little bit of a charisma deficit in some of those performances. It was very technocratic. And there were moments at which you could tell that Michael Bloomberg became a little bit prickly with the debate moderators and his opponents. And I think that's something that could be worth watching on Wednesday, when you can bet there will be plenty of candidates who will want to knock him off his game, will want to create a bad moment, and will really want to try and make Michael Bloomberg's first impression with many voters who have only seen his campaign ads a negative one.
Right. Well, Aaron, because Bloomberg has yet to participate in a primary or caucus, how crucial will tomorrow's debate be for him?
Well, there's no question it's a big one. He has been running an unorthodox campaign. He has been ignoring the first 4 states where he's not on the ballot. But that's allowed him to basically drown the rest of the country in campaign ads. So if you look at a lot of these Super Tuesday states where he's inched up in the polling over the last several weeks, he's running the vast majority of the ads in those states. Meanwhile, the other candidates have been fighting over the first 4 states. They've largely been attacking each other. So he's essentially had a pretty free ride to this point. He has spent hundreds of millions of dollars virtually uncontested in a lot of these states. And I think Wednesday is the moment at which that changes. That's the moment which a lot of the scrutiny we're seeing of his record in the last few days here could really be put on the national stage and create a new narrative for his campaign. And really, it's the first time that he is going to have to stand up for some of these things with millions of people watching at the same time. So I think it's a massive moment for him. If he can pass the test, he certainly has a seat at the table on Super Tuesday. But I think we really have yet to see this kind of scrutiny on the Bloomberg campaign, and that's going to change in a big way on Wednesday.
And Maggie, President Trump is accusing Bloomberg of trying to buy the nomination. In a tweet, the president writes, Bloomberg is, quote, doing nothing less than an illegal campaign contribution. He is spreading money all over the place, only to have recipients of his cash payments, many former opponents, happily joining or supporting his campaign. Fill us in on what the president is talking about there.
Yeah, well, there are a couple things he might be talking about here. I mean, one is that Bloomberg has certainly spent huge amounts of money donating to candidates before he ran for president. And there are people across the country who have turned around and endorsed his campaign now. And so that's helped get him support that, you know, it is not, of course, illegal to be a donor before you are running for president. But some people have said, you know, that there are a number of people backing Bloomberg who have really benefited from his billions of dollars in the past. So that's really worked in his favor during this campaign. You also have this dynamic going on where Bloomberg is hiring people across the country to work for his campaign, Democratic talent from candidates who have dropped out of the race, people who are used to running state and local races. So you're getting to this point where Bloomberg's network is so big that it's kind of penetrating the Democratic establishment in all these different states. And he's kind of, through word of mouth, you know, just through his employees in states, starting to gain a valuable foothold in these areas. So there are ways in which Bloomberg's money is kind of getting him influence across the country right now.
And to be clear, Maggie, you touched on this a moment ago, but is there anything potentially illegal about the money Bloomberg previously gave to cities and organizations run by politicians now supporting his campaign?
No, you're allowed to, you know, donate to state, you know, and local elected officials like Bloomberg did. You know, he also spent millions of dollars in PACs that were just aimed at helping take back the House and the Senate, and that was all perfectly above board. You know, his work in the past that we have any indication of. It was just like any other political donor.
Well, Caitlin, Bloomberg has been running ads that include past praise from former President Barack Obama. Let's play a short clip of that.
A great president and an effective mayor, leadership that makes a difference.
He's been a leader throughout the country for the past 12 years. Mr. Michael Bloomberg is here.
Perhaps not surprisingly, Bernie Sanders is putting out an ad tying himself to the former president as well. Let's listen.
I was a Joe Biden supporter. I switched from the Biden campaign to the Sanders campaign because I want to see the kind of lines around the building that we saw in 2008. I want to see people motivated.
So, Caitlin, of course, President Obama has stayed out of the Democratic primary so far. Is this how we should expect him to be invoked as he remains quiet here?
Right. by staying out of the primary, it's allowed a lot of these contenders to claim hit onto his legacy. So you've seen him appear in a lot of campaign ads, even though he hasn't endorsed anybody. That Bloomberg ad that you played made it seem like the former president was on the side of Bloomberg, but he has largely stayed on the sidelines, not wanting to inject himself into this primary. There have been questions, of course, about what the lack of endorsement for Joe Biden means for Joe Biden, and Biden has said that he wants to win this on his own. There is going to be a question of when the former president steps into this race, because he is the most popular Democrat right now, and this comes at a time that Democrats really can't figure out who they want to be the frontrunner, who they want to be to kind of lead the party at this point. That's what this primary is all about, and it figures to be a longer one, given that we don't really have a clear vision of how voters in the Democratic Party want. We have seen turnout be kind of lower in Iowa and New Hampshire. We're waiting to see what turnout will be like here in Nevada to see how engaged the Democrats are. But a lot of Democratic voters that we talk to say that they don't have much guidance. They want someone that can defeat Donald Trump, and they kind of just want this decision to be made and that they'll show up. So I don't think we'll expect the former president to get involved until after this primary process goes through. But there is this question of if Bernie Sanders, who's holding an event later today right behind me, if he starts to gain traction, and if lots of Democrats start to feel concerned about that, is that a moment for Obama to step in?
Right. Something we'll continue to watch. Aaron, as we mentioned, a third of the delegates up for grabs in this race will be allocated after Super Tuesday. By the end of March, more than half the delegates will be gone. How does this condensed primary schedule impact the race?
Yeah, it's a really undersold part of this discussion right now, I think, is just how many delegates are going to be doled out, basically in a 3-week span between March 3rd and March 17th. To the extent this is an open race after Nevada and then South Carolina, to the extent there are going to be multiple candidates still in contention, it really means that those delegates are going to be, apportioned very widely. There's going to be plenty of candidates getting delegates. It's going to be much harder for a candidate potentially to get a majority of delegates and win the nomination outright. So I think that once we get closer to Super Tuesday, and by the way, Super Tuesday is just 3 days after South Carolina, there's not a whole lot of turnaround time for these candidates. We may be starting to talk more about a contested convention. We may be talking about whether the frontrunners can actually get a majority of delegates. But right now, it looks like a lot of these candidates are staying in the race, hoping that Super Tuesday is their ticket, and then they'll go from there.
A lot of potential scenarios to game out. Maggie, where do the Democratic candidates stand on fundraising, and how will that impact the upcoming March sprint?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're actually going to get more information on Thursday when the candidates have to disclose their January fundraising. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who voluntarily said how much money he raised in January, which is really telling. It shows that, oftentimes when it comes to fundraising, candidates are quiet when they don't have anything good to say, and Sanders came out and said he had raised $25 million in January. Everyone else stayed quiet. Bloomberg has, of course, spent close to $400 million on ads alone. And that just shows that he is really blowing everyone else out of the water when it comes to his huge campaign spending. I think that one person that everyone's kind of watching a little bit warily right now is Joe Biden. He came out of the first couple states. Obviously, his campaign hadn't done so well, but he also started this year with less than $10 million in the bank for his campaign. And his campaign has sometimes struggled to stay on track with fundraising and keep up with the other leading candidates. Now, Biden, so we'll have to see if Biden has been able to raise money early this year, or if he still has less than candidates like Sanders and Buttigieg and even Elizabeth Warren, who have consistently been outraising him on the campaign trail.
Well, so Maggie, aside from the Biden campaign, is it clear which campaigns have the money to make it through that March sprint?
At the start of this year, the campaigns that seemed to have a significant amount of money heading forwards were Sanders. Of course, you have Steyer and Bloomberg. Those two can stay in the race as long as they want. They have literally billions to spend. Yeah. And then you had Pete Buttigieg, who has consistently brought in, $25 million plus each quarter. So he's been a really solid fundraiser. He can pull in money from both big donors who are excited about his campaign and small dollar donors. So that's he has a two-pronged approach approach. And he's obviously did well in the early states, so you'd guess that he's still been doing well on fundraising, and he did several big dollar events, a big swing through San Francisco last week. So you would imagine that Buttigieg is doing pretty well. And then Warren, I'd say that that's a question mark. Her campaign has had times when it's been raising a lot of money from small dollar donors. She only does small dollar fundraising. And then it's kind of waned a little bit at the end of last year. So you're not as sure about Warren. And Amy Klobuchar, of course, her campaign has been surging, but it's just a much smaller campaign than the others I just mentioned. She just has many fewer employees. She has less money in the bank. So the big question for her is, can she scale up to the point where she can really compete in these Super Tuesday states? Because, Buttigieg and Sanders were kind of in a place at the start of this year where they looked like they could compete, and everyone else is really trying to get bigger and bigger to where they can be running ads and competing in a number of these states.
Right. Can she scale up in the short time left before Super Tuesday here? Well, Caitlin,
yeah, which is hard.
Which is hard. You look at the calendar, boy, the clock really is ticking. Caitlin, there is one more primary in between Nevada and Super Tuesday, South Carolina, of course. The Biden campaign has been counting on the state as its so-called firewall, but the former vice president's lead there has shrunk in recent weeks. It was a 20-point lead at the start of the year. The latest polls now have it at 8 points. Is the Biden campaign concerned about how things are going there?
That's right. The Biden campaign has been arguing after the former vice president took real hits in New Hampshire and Iowa that when it came to the more diverse states participating in the primary process, Nevada and South Carolina, that's where he would start to gain momentum. So we're also looking to see how he places in the Nevada caucuses on Saturday. If he doesn't get a top finish, in the first or second place, what does that do going into South Carolina, which has really been where the campaign has been banking all of its support, especially since he had been strong among African-American voters. This is a lane where candidates like Michael Bloomberg are really trying to make their pitch. So depending on what happens tomorrow night, how Michael Bloomberg does in this debate, does he start to eclipse Joe Biden in these states that are much more diverse, that much more represent or much better represent, Democrats say, the party at large? I think it will raise real questions about how strong that firewall really is for the former vice president.
All right, so much to watch in these next few weeks. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Aaron Blake, and Maggie Severns. Thank you all very much.